let's talk a little bit about counterpoint. This is going to be a slightly advanced music theory topic, so if you're unfamiliar with scale degrees, if you're unfamiliar with intervals, and if you're unfamiliar with harmony, this might be a bit tough to follow, but hopefully it's not going to completely overwhelm you. I'm going to try and keep things as simple as possible. So counterpoint is really the foundation of all of these concepts in music theory that people tend to put importance on, and in my opinion, a little bit of excessive importance. There's a lot of weight given nowadays to this idea of harmony, where you have all these different chords that progress into one another and have some sort of functional purpose to them. I just played an example of that right now. This is a 1, 4, 5, 1 chord progression in the key of C minor. It is kind of the foundation of everything in terms of harmony, but I want to make an assertion. And this assertion is that there is actually no such thing as chords. Chords don't, technically speaking, exist. They do on a theoretical level, but practically speaking, there aren't chords. What you have is that melody, that melody, that melody, and that melody. That chord progression is just all of these individual melodies being essentially summed together in our ears in order to create this sense of harmonic motion. And the reason why you place so much importance on harmonic motion is because culturally, the kind of music that we make in America and kind of throughout the world has a history that descends from European choral music, church music, so to speak. There are a lot of other really important ways of interpreting music, or music theory approaches. A lot of things from like South America, a lot of things from, Africa and the Afro-Caribbean communities. Indian music theory is like a whole realm of stuff that, like, if you took someone who spent their life studying Western music theory and you threw them into Indian music theory class, they would be overwhelmed day one. There's so much shit there. But a lot of popular music, a lot of that stuff comes down to this type of music that formulated in a bunch of cathedrals and monasteries and stuff back in like the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, stuff like that. You had to start just a melody, a single melodic line. And eventually people were like, well, what happens if I sing the same notes, sing the same rhythms, but I change the notes? Like if I have this, what if I do right on top? You get this really cool new sensation. We get this harmonious, sometimes tense, relationship between them. You could even go further. Again, we're just taking this melody, repeating the rhythm, and adding different pitches on top. Now, let's say you are, for example, this monk living in a big stone monastery up in the mountains in what would now be considered Scandinavia, for example. Big stone walls reflect a lot of information. So to replicate that, let's put a reverb on this piano. And let's set this to a cathedral. Where is a cathedral? Medium church, sure. As I let go of the note, we have this continuous signal that carries on between the notes. Now, what happens when I start playing that sequence before? Ooh, there was kind of a weird moment there. Ooh. Ooh. That kind of rubs me the wrong way. What if we went, Ooh, I just changed a couple notes. I went from C and E to B and F, B, D, C, E. Now that second note, the F is gonna go to a G. Ooh. There we go. Now none of these notes have that weird, tense relationship. So let's maybe try and come up with a new musical line that avoids that line, right? Let's start like here. Ooh. 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 Those two notes in this huge long reverb. Ooh, that's tense. That's gritty. Scary. Ooh, it's very scary melodies, right? So now we have these two things we want to avoid. We want to avoid this relationship of a second, especially a minor second. We also want to avoid this relationship of a tritone. So let's see what we can do. Ooh. That sounds really nice. Over time, these types of rules became codified into this idea of note against note, point against counterpoint. In the 14, 15, 1600s about, we had an era known as the Baroque era of music. This is where we had a lot of the rules of Renaissance composition turned into these formalized rules of writing music, of counterpoint. This is the book that I have. This is called Gradus ad Parnassum by this old, dead, I think Austrian guy named Johann Fuchs. This is considered like the foundational work for everything counterpoint. We're going to talk about this a little bit, but I'm going to gloss over a lot of this. I actually recommend you take a look at this. It is a cheap book. It's only like 10, 12 bucks. Yeah, it's like 13 bucks US. With all of that preamble out of the way, let's talk a little bit about species counterpoint and what kind of rules we are going to work with. So, in counterpoint, we are going to be writing using rules that are really old, really rigid, and enforce a certain style of writing music. I want to be clear about that as we go into this. None of this applies to your music that you're writing for yourself. This will teach you things that will influence your writing for yourself, but if you like something that this says do not do, ignore these rules. Ignore these whenever applicable. Music has evolved in the time since this book's writing. We don't really care about a lot of this stuff. I'm going to mention one right now about perfect fourths. When this book came out, perfect fourths were considered dissonant. That relationship right there. that was considered a dissonant relationship. Doesn't sound dissonant to me. Doesn't really sound that bad. Actually sounds kind of nice. For reasons we'll discuss later on, not in this video, not in this stream, but later on once I do another refresher on counterpoint in full, you will see why the fourth is considered dissonant. But let's rate all of the intervals in a kind of order from smallest to largest in terms of whether they are dissonant intervals or whether they are consonant intervals. Dissonant being tense, consonant being not tense. We have our seconds. You have the minor second, which I'll indicate with a lowercase m. And then we have the major second. And these are both considered dissonant. Big D for dissonant. Then we have our thirds. We have our minor third. And we have our major third. So that's a shitty 3. These are considered consonant. Then we have our perfect intervals, which I'm going to mark with a P. We have the perfect fourth, which, as I mentioned, is a dissonant interval in this rule set. Then we have the perfect fifth, which is consonant, but there's a little star, there's a little asterisk on this in terms of what is okay when it comes to the perfect fifth. It's a very special kind of consonants. Then we have the sixths, our minor and major sixths, which are both considered consonant. And then we have our sevenths, which are our last pair of intervals, the minor and major sevenths, which are both considered dissonant. Now, I'm going to do something kind of weird. I'm going to draw a dotted line right between the perfect fourth and perfect fifth, because back here we have the P1, a special interval, the P1, which is considered consonant. And then on the other side, we have the P8, or the perfect octave, which is also consonant. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, we can look at this as a circle. This is the same exact thing as this. If we go down from the P1, the note right here is technically a major seventh, because what we're doing is we're perceiving this 8 as coming all the way back down, and there's a 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 going back down here. It's a continuous loop going up or down, kind of like an Ouroboros. And same exact thing going up here. Above the perfect octave, we have a minor second. You could also see this as a minor ninth. But we're not going to worry about that, because in counterpoint, whenever you're dealing with intervals above a octave, you sort of compress them down. You subtract 7 from whatever number you have over the octave. So a 10th would be a third, an 11th would be a fourth, etc., going up. So from this point on, I'm only going to refer to things within the span of an octave. Now, if we look at this, if I count down, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's count up now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do that again. So we have 8 going to 7. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're going up. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there is this pretty interesting symmetry within this 12-note range. Now, I am specifically avoiding something here. You notice there is one interval not expressed here. It exists in this division. It's our symmetrical barrier between climbing down or climbing up to an interval. That's our lovely friend, the tritone, which you rarely, if ever, see expressed as a tritone. Instead, you see it referred to as either a flat 5, where we're taking this note right here, this perfect fifth, and lowering it by 1, or we have the sharp or augmented fourth, taking this and going up. The reason why you don't really see this referred to as a tritone is because a tritone is a conceptual thing. It only exists in the realm of theory. Everywhere else, if you're looking at a scale, like for example, C major, the only way to get to a tritone is to take either the perfect fifth and lower the fifth by 1, or take the fourth and raise that by 1. Now, tritones are always considered dissonant. When you are writing Baroque era counterpoint, for now, you are forbidden from using tritones ever. The big overarching rule for almost every part of Baroque era counterpoint is that you want to avoid reaching an interval of a tritone at all costs. No matter what you do, you must avoid the tritone. So we're not going to include it here, except to say this interval creates a tritone. Don't do that. Now, let's classify all of these things together, right? So we have our consonant intervals, and then we have our dissonant intervals. On consonants, we have the perfect unison. We have the minor and major thirds. We have the perfect fifth. We have the minor and major sixths. And we have the perfect octave. On the dissonant realm, we have the minor and major seconds. We have the perfect fourth. We have the minor and major sevenths. And we have this kind of illusory tritone. Everything we're going to talk about going forwards is about only using these relationships. So keep that in mind going forwards. I'm going to give you a checklist. This is going to be how we're going to write our counterpoint going forwards. Step 1. The lower note, which we're going to call our CF or cantus firmus, which you can read as like the unchanging melody or the unchanging hymn, must match the first note of counterpoint, which I'll put as CTP for counterpoint, or it must equal a perfect fifth. That is to say, if you are writing counterpoint towards a cantus firmus, that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. You have this unchanging, rigid foundational melody, and you're writing a note that matches that. It can either be that same note displaced by octaves. So I'll put this as a P8. Or it can be a perfect fifth. Your very first relationship should be the distance between C and C an octave up. Or the relationship of a perfect fifth, C to G. As you can hear, I almost said as you can see, there isn't any tension at all. In fact, we have almost too clean a relationship. The octave, you almost can't hear that higher note. This has to deal with the overtone series because the first overtone of that lower note is at this higher note. And then the perfect fifth is essentially an octave transpose version of the second harmonic. Those are the first three notes of the overtone series. If that's our root, that's our first overtone at the octave, second at the octave and a fifth, third at 2 octaves. So, because those notes, these intervals are too perfect to be used outside of our beginning and our ending, but we'll get to that at the last one. So the second thing on our checklist is avoid P8s and P5s before end. Avoid does not mean never. Avoid means if you have an option between hitting a perfect eighth, a perfect octave, a perfect fifth, or another consonant interval, if you're not at the very beginning or the very end of the counterpoint, try to lean or favor towards the more colorful intervals. Step 3. We're going to have a preference. Prefer oblique over contrary, contrary over similar, similar over parallel. That's our next rule. Now, oblique is if the cantus firmus goes up or down, your note stays the same. Your note does not change. So for example, if I have C and G, and then my cantus firmus moves up to an E, I will not move my note. I will keep the note that I'm playing on a G. Both of those sound good. Oblique motion means one note moves, the other stays the same. Contrary motion says that if the cantus firmus goes down, your note goes up. Or if the cantus firmus goes up, your note goes down. So, going back to our example, C to G, the note in the cantus firmus will go to a D. The note in our counterpoint will fall down to this F. Sound kind of like this. Or if my cantus firmus jumps down to this G, maybe my counterpoint goes up to the B. Like that. Consonant relationships. Similar motion is going to be if the cantus firmus moves up, your note will also move up, but at a different rate. If theirs is going high, yours might not go as high, or it might go even higher. And if the cantus firmus goes down, maybe you go slightly down or even further down. This would be, for example, if I have C and G and my cantus firmus goes down to A, my counterpoint will go down from G to F. They're going in the same direction, but they're going different amounts. Or, as another one, if my cantus firmus is going to D, maybe my counterpoint goes up to the B. And finally, similar over parallel, where parallel is the exact same thing from both notes. No matter what direction you're going in, the cantus firmus and the counterpoint are identical in their distance. This would be, for example, if I went from C and G to A and E, or C and G to D and A. Now, that sounds potentially familiar, especially if you listen to a lot of rock music, but this is why there's that weird asterisk on the perfect fifth. This technically exists for the perfect unison or the perfect octave, but since you're already avoiding the perfect octave and you're generally not hitting the unison, we're just going to focus in on the perfect fifth. When you have any perfect interval moving in parallel motion to another perfect interval, our ears will perceive that as a single note. Doesn't really feel to us like I have two notes there. It just sounds like I just have that with a little bit of extra texture on top. It's as if I was doing this. You can barely hear that highest note because it's matching in almost lockstep with the overtones of that lower note. Since counterpoint is all about maintaining independence between these voices, because remember, no such thing as chords. You just have different melodies moving in harmony. If they're no longer moving in harmony, if they're moving in parallel, our ears stop accepting their independence. We start assigning them that one broad category of that sound. If you like that sound, you're allowed to use it in your own writings. Again, I want to stress this. All of what we're talking about is just focused on trying to sound like we're making music from the 1500s in this Baroque era style of counterpoint. They didn't like that. They wanted the independence of voices. Now, with that being said, when can you use parallel motion? That'll be checkmark 4, where on 4, you can only use parallel motion with thirds and sixths with an asterisk. And I'll talk about that asterisk in just a second. With most of these other motions, you naturally will start to avoid these dissonant intervals and these two perfect intervals. When you're doing oblique motion, you can always hear that upper note staying where it's at. Contrary motion, you can always hear that separation of the notes. With similar motion, we're still maintaining that sensation of independence. But if I have parallel motion in thirds, we still feel that independence to a point. The general rule is no more than 3 times can you actually repeat parallel motion using thirds and sixths. The more you do it, and even similar motion to an extent has this problem, try to avoid similar motion more than 3 times, because that starts to create this feeling of just a single note rather than 2 independent voices. That's really just one sound doing its own thing. But you still feel all of those independent notes. It doesn't feel like a homogeneous idea. The next thing is going to be steps are better than leaps. You should generally have more stepwise motion in your melodies, in your counterpoint, than leap-wise motion. Another way to look at this is conjunct versus disjunct in terms, or conjunctive versus disjunctive motion. Conjunctive being notes that are separated by a major or minor second. If I jump back to Ableton, show off float key for a second. Each one of those notes is a major or minor second away from each other. Those are easy to sing. Remember, when we first started this, the whole hypothetical scenario we were under is that we are some monk in a big stone monastery. We don't have instruments. The only thing we can do is Domine et Patri et Filii et. So if I'm trying to sing a melody, da 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 da, that's easier than da 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 da. Like, it's really hard to jump from. That's a weird jump. It feels kind of weird. And we'll get into what leaps are appropriate. But in general, you want to favor the notes that are easier to sing than the notes that are harder to sing. And anything that is bigger than a major second is considered disjunctive or leap-wise motion. All of those big jumps, thirds, fourths, fifths, etc., are leap-wise, disjunctive motion. You can use them. In fact, I encourage you to use them in your melodies, especially when you're writing your counterpoint, but try to use them sparingly. As a follow-up to that, I'd say this is like a 5A. Leap when CF, the cantus firmus, does not. What I mean by that is if both the cantus firmus and the melody leap, it will start to create too much separation between voices. That isn't to say you can never do that. For example, you can totally do that. Like, that sounds fine. This is C jumping down to E, E jumping up to G. Sounds fine. You can totally do that. But the more they leap, the more separate they get, and the more we start to lose that semblance of harmony. So, you don't have to always do this, but in general, try to only leap when the cantus firmus is doing oblique or stepwise motion, unless obviously it's a big emotional moment, in which case big leaps are fine. For the next one, obviously there's a lot of rules here, which kind of belies the idea that it's not as simple as what we can do. That's why we're not getting, or what we can do in one lecture. That's why we're not going into more than second species today. 6 is going to be what we'll call is special leap rules, which I'm going to gloss over for now. We're going to come back to this when we're done with the list. But these are special rules that govern how you can leap. And then the last one is end with a 5-2-1 progression on P5 or a perfect octave, which is to say, if I'm in C major, the last notes should be something like or like that. With this, you want to have the notes of your 5 chord or a dominant chord relationship, which is to say a diminished 7th or the leading tone chord is also appropriate here. But like you want like B and D to end on C, whether they're displaced by octaves or not. So these 7 rules are your main focal point for writing counterpoint. In terms of these special rules for leaps, there's 2 parts to it. 1, it's going to be what to do after you leap. And 2, it's going to be where you can leap. Whenever you leap, if you leap, say, from the root up to a perfect 5th, the next move should be a step in the opposite direction. So we're going to do here, it's going to be a step to a perfect 4th. In relationship of like the notes to the root, for example. So if I have C and C, and then I jump to G, I would want to have the perfect 5th I just jumped to essentially counterbalanced with a step down. Feels pretty appropriate. And you can think about this like your melody is a long jumper doing cross country or track and field. When you jump, there's all of this motion that is carrying you. You have a lot of momentum. You have a lot of force. When you land, when your feet hit the ground, there's still a lot of that forwards momentum. And if you don't want to fall flat on your face, usually what you do is you take a step backwards. So you jump and then you step back to kind of balance yourself. That happens in music, just as it happens in long jumping. No matter where you leap, consider, how can I step backwards? If I cannot do that, or I don't want to do that, there's another thing you can do, which is to continue leaping in a very specific way, which is to outline the notes of those chords we're saying don't exist. You need to create an arpeggio. So for example, if my counterpoint starts on the perfect unison or the perfect octave, whatever, if we leap to the major 3rd, we could then do another leap to the perfect 5th. So it would be something like this. Or maybe something like. Our ears will allow for that because of the harmonious relationship between that arpeggio. These are the 2 ways that you would leap. So if I am kind of drawing this out on, we got P1, got R. I'm going to do this in just the major scale, so I'm going to skip over some of the other intervals. We have the major 2nd, we have the major 3rd, we have the perfect 4th, we have the 5th, we have the minor 6th, or wait, no, the major 6th, excuse me, because we're on the major key. major sixth, major seventh, then we have our octave. Option 1, if you leap, you must then step backwards. Or if you leap, you must outline an arpeggio. This also works elsewhere. Like you could do, for example, a leap up to here and then leap back down to here. I know it's getting a bit messy, but I'm just trying to show the different relationships. Now, that being said, what notes can you leap to? Okay and not okay. So you can always do a minor or a major third. You can always leap a minor third. You can leap a perfect fourth. You can leap a perfect fifth. You can leap an ascending minor sixth. You cannot leap an ascending major sixth. That'll be our first no-no. And you cannot leap minor or major sevenths. You can, I believe, do a descending major sixth, if I'm not mistaken, but generally I just avoid major sixths if I'm leaping. And you can also leap octaves. So generally, there isn't a lot of restriction on how you can leap, but the further you leap, the more you have to bias yourself towards this rule, where you have to step in the opposite direction. If I am leaping a perfect octave, I'm probably going to step down to the major or minor sixth, or seventh, excuse me, in order to counteract all of that momentum in the notes. And perfect fourth, same way. Perfect fifth, same way. Minor sixth, same exact way. Thirds, since they pretty quickly lead into the arpeggios, they're generally fine. And I think that actually covers it for all of those special rules. So obviously, you know, there's a lot that we've covered here already. I know it's probably a bit overwhelming, but this is exactly how you will start writing all of your counterpoint. So now let's come up with a melody, some sort of cantus firmus, right? Let's do that. This will be our cantus firmus. So to start off, let's do what's called first species counterpoint. First species is where you have a single note against a single other note. Copy this up to an octave. Then I want to start to follow all of these different rules to see where we can go. So first, let's see if, can we do oblique motion? Nope. Already I can hear that that's a dissonant note. If we go back to our list, we can see that in our dissonant notes, we have the minor and major seventh. This is a minor seventh. So now let's do contrary motion. The melody is going up, so let's go down. Ooh, so that's kind of cool. Can we do oblique motion here? We could. This is acceptable, but we want to avoid the perfect fifth. That's what we're making right here. So now we can't do B because that's a tritone. Ooh. So instead, we'll do a leap. We'll jump down to the A. All right, so let's do this. All right, so I can already tell that's a second. Seconds are no-nos. They're dissonant. So if we do contrary motion, we're going to end up with a perfect unison, which is okay, but we want to maintain a little bit more independence of our voices. So this is going to come up to the B. So let's see, how can we do this? We could either step up, but let's do some oblique motion. I think it's okay for us to play around with this. So now let's go here. So we're doing a little more motion. Go there. Now we're doing a little bit of a leap here to end, a leap of a perfect fourth, but it's getting us back to our root. Typically you want to not leap like this, so I would say potentially avoid that. I might even do a different leap. I'll do a leap of a perfect fourth here, so that we can now step down and we get this nice contrary motion to our root. Nice. That is our cantus firmus and our counterpoint. We've followed all the rules and we got something that sounds pretty not bad. We could even go a little bit further, add a little bit more motion to this ending. Nice. If we go back and we examine all of this, we're following all these rules. I took a leap and then I stepped in the opposite direction. I took a leap and I stepped in the opposite direction. And at every point, there is a consonant relationship here. This is an octave. This is a sixth. This is a third. This is a third. This is a sixth. This is a third. Remember, this is not counting this octave displacement. It's still C to E, even though there is an octave here. You could also look at this as a tenth, relationship of a tenth, but we're subtracting it down. And then we end on an octave. If I wanted to convert this into something with a bit more motion for my counterpoint, we would move from first species into what's called second species. There are, I believe, 5 different species of counterpoint. We're only going to talk about the first 2 today because this is already getting a bit long. To do second species, all we have to do is take every note, shrink its duration by half, and try and find some note that allows us to step in between the note we had and the note we land on. Now, you don't have to do it like this, but when you're starting off, one of the easiest ways to get used to second species is to start writing first species, so now you know your destinations are all consonant, because you must start each note sequence on a consonant interval. You can step to dissonant intervals, but you have to end on a consonant relationship. So, for example, I'm just going to start adding in these different relationships here. So let's see what this sounds like. Not bad. Again, I want to remind you all that, like, this is not what I'm expecting you to do in your own compositions. The thing about species counterpoint is that this is an educational tool. It's going to sound very stuffy. It's going to sound very rigid. It's going to sound essentially really boring and really basic. That's because you're not allowing yourself freedom to do what sounds maybe better to you, but rather try to learn how these rules interact. At all of these points, I'm still following the rules I've set forth, but I'm just making a little bit of complication here, where this is consonant, consonant, to consonant, consonant, to consonant, dissonant. I'm stepping up to a tritone, a really risky interval, but we're ending on a consonance here, consonance here, consonance here, dissonance here, but we're stepping to a consonance here, another consonance, but technically a dissonance with these fourths. And then we have our final octave to finish on. I actually encourage you all to go find melodies you like and start writing first and second species counterpoint with those melodies. See if you can come up with your own musical idea that reinterprets a melody that you like, because then you could delete that starting melody that's not a horrible melody. And what if we extended some of these notes out? Rid of this one. Not too bad. This is kind of not what I like. That instead. All of a sudden, I have my own customized melody that would work with this other melody, but I can now go in and write my own counterpoint with this. Here, and I'm just doing first species stuff here for now. All of a sudden, we are starting to get more harmonious relationships, newer relationships. As you go through this and you start learning how to apply this conditional to your counterpoint, you might start to learn that every time you replace that B with the B flat, you end up with all of a sudden we sound much more consistently in this key. I'm actually going to pull this up, I think, to F. Yeah, really nice, really nice. We've just gone from that modal relationship to a purely tonal relationship. We are now firmly in the key of D minor. And in fact, we got our major and minor scales by modifying other modes. If you go from the note D to the note D, and this will be the last thing we talk about here, using only the white keys on the keyboard, or you go from F to F using only the white keys on the keyboard, you get the Dorian mode and the Lydian mode. And these notes, or these scales, came before major and minor. The big difference between them is that you took this tritone relationship right here, and this tritone relationship right here, and you took this note and lowered them by one. Just like that. All of a sudden, we have major and minor. So there is a lot of interesting ramifications, so to speak, when we look at counterpoint as a starting point rather than the destination, so to speak. It's how we can understand other things rather than just use them as they are. But that is going to be it for this topic. Thank you so much for watching this. If you're watching on YouTube, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, click the bell, do all that fun YouTube stuff. Check me out on Twitch, check me out on Twitter, join the Discord. This is where you can get that Gratis ad Parnassum PDF. If you have any questions about this, drop those in the comments. If you have some of your own ideas or comments about counterpoint, ways that you use counterpoint in your own writing, I would love to hear those. I think that should be everything for this, so I guess this will be where we cut the video.